A young woman, alone in her room. Then the lights go out. Before she can scream, before she can even think, the door bursts open. A man steps inside. And what happens next is the kind of thing you only expect to see in a horror movie, except this wasn't fiction. This was real life. Cambridge, England, 1974. This is a true crime documentary about a predator who terrorized an entire city, a man who wore wigs, disguises, and eventually a black leather mask with one word painted across the front in bold letters: Rapist. He attacked in the dead of night. He attacked in broad daylight. He attacked and then vanished for months at a time, while over 100 police officers scrambled to find him. And the most disturbing part? They were looking for completely the wrong man. This is the case of Peter Cook, the Cambridge Rapist. And trust me, once you hear the full story, you won't be able to look away. That first attack on Springfield Road was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, November 1st, he struck again, this time a 20-year-old student in a flat on Abbey Road. She had just stepped out of the bath. He had already snuck in and was waiting. He grabbed her, tied her up, then pressed an ether-soaked pad over her mouth until she went limp. And then, just like the first victim, he violated her. Detectives knew immediately. Same method, same calculated cruelty. They were dealing with a serial rapist. The Cambridge police wasted no time issuing warnings to single women across the city. Lock your doors, lock your windows, do not take chances. But this man wasn't slowing down. November 11th, a woman fought back. She drove her foot hard into his groin, then reached up and yanked something off his head, a wig. The disguise was blown. He ran. But he wasn't done. 2 days later, he was back, this time targeting a 28-year-old music student at a teacher training college. She had gone alone to a remote, soundproofed building on campus to practice her cello. He jumped her, threw her to the ground, and told her he would kill her if she didn't comply. He bound her hands, covered her head, and dragged her across the dark grounds to a shed. A soundproofed room, a deserted campus, a shed hidden in the dark. Nobody stumbles onto a spot like that by accident. He had been watching. He had been planning. This was no random opportunist. This was a predator operating with cold, deliberate precision. By mid-November, the Cambridge police force knew exactly what it was dealing with. This man moved freely across the city. He used disguises. He carried tools and chemicals. He was prepared, calculated, and completely without conscience. A dedicated task force was assembled, led by Detective Inspector Jack Cole and Detective Superintendent Bernard Hodson. Officers fanned out across Cambridge, conducting citywide patrols. And when conventional methods weren't enough, they got creative. Officers hid in potential attack spots, crouched inside bins, perched up in trees watching and waiting in the dark. A wanted notice went out. Cambridge colleges organized bodyguard schemes, pairing male students with women traveling or living alone. A £1,000 reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. Then December 8th, he broke into a block of flats in Newham, found a 21-year-old student asleep, pressed a knife to her throat, and dragged her outside into the garden. He used her own tights to blindfold her, and when he was done, he told her he had an STI, a deliberate, vicious act of humiliation designed to break her completely. The attacks were escalating. The cruelty was deepening. A week later, he returned to the very same street where that woman had pulled off his wig. This time, he came back wearing a different wig and a fake beard. When his new target fought back, he didn't retreat. He pulled out his knife and used it. The woman needed stitches. She was lucky to be alive. Cambridge was terrified, and the man responsible was still out there. The winter months brought no relief. The attacks had paused, but nobody felt safe. Investigators worked around the clock, combing through victim descriptions, physical evidence, and whatever limited forensic material they had managed to collect. And what they had wasn't much. Small footprints, semen samples useful only for basic blood grouping. This was 1974. Forensic DNA profiling didn't exist yet. The science simply wasn't there. Witness descriptions painted a picture of a relatively short man, possibly young, possibly with long hair. Acting on that profile, officers fanned out across Cambridge and took saliva samples from men aged roughly 17 to 30. Nothing hit. And there was a very good reason for that. Their profile was wrong. Completely wrong. The man they were hunting wasn't young. He wasn't in his 20s. He was closer to 47 years old, and he had been using wigs, disguises, and makeup specifically to hide that fact. When he fled crime scenes, he sometimes cycled away dressed in women's clothing, looking to any patrol officer passing in the dark like nothing more than a woman on a bicycle. They weren't just missing him, they were looking for someone who didn't exist. Then April 13th, a 23-year-old receptionist was jolted awake by a hooded figure dressed head to toe in black leather. And this time, he didn't just attack, he introduced himself. He told her exactly who he was, the Cambridge Rapist. He bound her, gagged her, violated her, and fled, leaving her tied up for hours. She eventually worked her way to the window, pushed the latch open with her teeth, and screamed for help. He now had a name for himself. He was enjoying this. And that changed everything. By April, the pressure on Cambridge police was immense. The number of officers assigned to the case had climbed to 60, and still nothing. The question everyone was asking was simple. Why couldn't they catch this man? Part of the answer was already clear: they were chasing the wrong profile. Every photo fit, every public appeal, every briefing pointed toward a young man under 30. But there was something else working in his favor. He was bold, brazen, and he was getting bolder by the day. One particular local man had even come onto the radar of investigators, a known burglar with a long criminal history who had allegedly been walking into Cambridge sex shops claiming to be the serial attacker. Extraordinarily bold in a city on high alert, detectives questioned him twice and searched his caravan and his workshop. They found nothing they could use. He walked free. Then May 6th, for the first time, an attack occurred in broad daylight. He entered a woman's home, stabbed her in the stomach, and violated her. But what stopped everyone cold was what he was wearing. A black mask, and across the front, in bold painted letters, R-A-P-I-S-T. He would later explain it himself. He wore it so he wouldn't have to introduce himself before attacking. Because the word painted across his face, he said, frightened women more effectively than saying it out loud. He wanted to spread as much fear as humanly possible. This was no longer just a criminal. This was a man performing his own terror. Desperate, investigators tried something unconventional. A psychiatrist made a direct, televised appeal, not to the public, but to the attacker himself. The thinking was calculated. If conventional policing couldn't break the case, maybe his own arrogance would. Give him a platform, let him talk. It worked partly. He made contact. Told the psychiatrist that part of him felt compelled to carry out the attacks, but that another part of him was sorry. A meeting was arranged. He never showed up. He didn't stop. Of course he didn't. Around 2 a.m. in the morning, on June 8th, 1975, a figure in a black hood knocked at a room in a hostel used by hospital staff. A 27-year-old medical clerk cracked open her door, stopped by a safety chain she had recently installed. Smart. Through the gap, she saw him. The hood. The darkness. She screamed loud and repeatedly. He thrust his knife through the gap and cut her hand. Then he heard voices. Movement. 2 men fishing for eels just 200 yards away had heard the screaming. So had the hostel porter. Too many witnesses. He ran. Within minutes, roughly 100 officers flooded the streets with one order: stop everyone. No exceptions. About a mile away, a detective constable spotted a cyclist in a red coat, women's clothing, moving fast. When the officer stepped in to stop them, the cyclist tried to swerve around. The officer knocked them straight to the ground. A wig came off. Underneath it was a man. The officer looked inside the bag. And there it was, a handmade leather mask with the letters R-A-P-I-S-T painted across the front. It was over. The man on the ground was Peter Samuel Cook, 47 years old, from a small village just outside Cambridge. To the world around him, he was utterly unremarkable. A wife. A caravan behind his parents' home. A steady, ordinary job. A few people who knew him found him slightly odd. He'd lend out adult content to neighbors, make offhand comments that left people deeply uncomfortable. He had even told people, casually, that he was a sex offender. Nobody took him seriously. They should have. Peter Cook's first brush with the criminal justice system came at around the age of 10. The exact details remain murky, but the outcome was clear. He was sent to what was then known as an approved school, a bad boys' home. That was just the beginning. From there, it was a young offenders institute, then adult prison, then a psychiatric institution, and eventually Broadmoor. If you're not familiar with Broadmoor, understand this. It is one of only a handful of high-security psychiatric hospitals in all of England. It doesn't take ordinary patients. It takes people considered too dangerous or too disturbed for either standard prison or regular psychiatric care, the kind of people society has run out of options for. Peter Cook spent 17 months there before being released in 1968. He was around 40 years old, and whatever the system had attempted to do with him across 3 decades, none of it had worked. By the early 1970s, he had built a quiet but substantial reputation as a burglar in the Cambridge area. Locals had even given him a nickname, the Human Fly. When police searched his home after his arrest, what they found was chilling. Women's clothing, wigs, dark glasses, makeup, a supply of ether, and something that made investigators' blood run cold: copies of keys to women's hostels. He hadn't been getting lucky. He had been methodical, organized, prepared, every single time. The Cambridge police had been hunting this man for 8 months. Now, finally they had him. Peter Cook's first court appearance came the very next morning, June 9, 1975. He arrived handcuffed, flanked by 2 detectives. Outside the courthouse, around 200 women had gathered before he even stepped out of the van. By the time the brief 3-minute hearing ended, that number had swelled to roughly 400. Several charges were read. The court requested that the names of the victims not be published, a protection that was new at the time and would soon be adopted far more widely across Britain. Cook was remanded in custody. October 3, 1975. The trial began. The judge appointed was Melford Stevenson, a man known for his severe sentencing remarks. There was no jury. Peter Cook had already admitted to 6 counts of rape and 1 count of burglary. He had confessed. There was nothing left to dispute. The prosecution laid out each offense in horrifying detail. They highlighted how humiliation wasn't just a byproduct of his attacks, it was a goal. In one instance, after assaulting a victim, Cook calmly explained to her exactly how police medically examine rape survivors deliberately, methodically, to shame her into silence and stop her from going to the police. The prosecution also raised something deeply unsettling, that Cook had been edging closer and closer to murder. The escalation was undeniable. The defense argued addiction to pornography. They pointed to his contact with the psychiatrist as evidence of remorse. Psychiatric evaluators who had assessed Cook told the court plainly he was not mentally ill in any recognized clinical sense. Judge Stevenson had heard enough. He sentenced Peter Cook to life imprisonment. Then he addressed Cook directly. He told him he had shown zero compassion for his victims and had terrorized an entire community. And then he said something that rarely gets said in a British courtroom. Life should mean life. He would never be free again. Cook was led out for the final time, with a blanket draped over his head, giving nothing away. Outside, crowds of women lined the street, shouting and banging on the sides of the police van as it pulled away. Peter Cook never walked free again. In 1995, a parole board reviewed his case and recommended a transfer to open conditions. He received therapy and treatment throughout his time behind bars. None of it led to his release. On a cold January morning in 2004, at the age of 75, Peter Samuel Cook died in prison, having spent 30 years behind bars for what he did to those women in Cambridge. The women he attacked have never spoken publicly, and that is entirely their right. But their silence doesn't mean their suffering was forgotten. Far from it. The case of Peter Cook left a mark on British law that endures to this day. It was this case, these victims, that helped push through legal protections, giving women anonymity in rape cases. Protections that have since shielded thousands of survivors across decades of prosecutions. Most of those women will never know that this case had anything to do with it. They'll never know the names of the women who came before them. But those women's courage in reporting, in fighting back, in speaking to police when it would have been so much easier not to quietly change the law forever. That is the case of the Cambridge Rapist. A predator hiding in plain sight. A community held hostage by fear. And a justice system forced to confront its own blind spots in forensics, in profiling, and in how it treated the very women it was supposed to protect. Some cases close, but they never really end. Thank you for watching, and for caring about these stories as much as I do. If this case touched you, hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss a new case. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.